think Joe Biden's going to be tough on China? He hasn't been. He spent his 50 years building up China. He shipped your American dream to China. That's his legacy. Joe shouldn't be running for president of the United States. He should be running for the president of China because he's actually created jobs there. Now, I said it, Joe has single-handedly done more damage to blue-collar jobs in America than any politician alive. And yet the media will let him run as though he's going to be the savior of that same class of Americans. They let him go to Pennsylvania and say he's not against fracking, even though it's like number 1 on his list. So, they let him get away with murder because the mainstream media is literally functioning as the marketing arm of the DNC today. And so, I couldn't believe it. I mean, of 10,000 journalists, all of who are dying to try to write a book, you'd think they'd look into the half a century of failed policies of the person who would be a disastrous president, and yet they refuse. So I said, hey, we got some time. Let's do this. It has to be done. We have to stand up and point out to the American people. So the book's really as much for, if not more so, for those who are on the fence, for those who are, consuming their news because they're not into it like you guys are. They're consuming 5 minutes of news a day. It's 96% negative against Donald Trump, even with the best economic numbers, even with, honestly, guys, even with peace deals in the Middle East. According to prior to Trump, a peace deal in the Middle East, let alone multiple, would be considered the holy grail of geopolitical politics, right? We've been hearing about these things like this elusive magical unicorn for our entire lives, and yet they never manifest. The New York Times criticized it. Well, Trump's doing it differently. I go, why don't you criticize the people who've been doing it the same for the last 40 years and haven't achieved anything, rather than those who changed up the game? So when you have that kind of bias that can't even acknowledge that kind of success, someone has to call them out, and that's why, it's got to be someone like myself, unfortunately. I would love not to have to do it. It's not easy being a guy from New York City who builds high-end real estate and come out as a pretty ardent conservative, but some things are worth fighting for. Our country is worth fighting for. Our kids' futures are worth fighting for. So we have no choice.
And Kimmy, you were also involved in helping put together the research, and you're a former prosecutor, and you have seen what the Biden family, what the money they have made, the lies they have told, and it was just alarming when you get into the research of it.
Yeah, it really is. And as a journalist, when I saw that, look, they're not even doing the job they're paid to do because they're so in the bag for Joe Biden, right? They really want to, as activists, they are working to get him elected every single day, which is why they have been totally remiss and really abject failures in terms of their duty to actually report the news and investigate and bring the American people the facts, the evidence about a man who believes he should be handed the White House and the Oval as a participation trophy, right?
Yeah, 100%. That's the one that's insane. Have you ever seen a candidate do less? No, seriously. In political history, I know people running for their second grade class presidency who have spent more time on the campaign trail than Joe Biden. There's no questions about it. I call it a burrow rather than the basement. He comes out of his burrow once every 4 or 5 days. He does an event, the media fawns over him. They ask him the questions that they are given by his campaign staff, and he reads it off of a teleprompter. Think about this for a second, guys. Do you want the guy that would have the nuclear codes to not be capable of remembering the basics of his platform with preloaded questions to a media who's trying to help him win? I've been doing this stuff relative to Joe Biden for about 15 minutes. It's not that hard. It's not rocket science, okay? And we all know Joe is no rocket scientist, but you would think that after 50 years, that's half a century, guys. After half a century, you'd think he'd be able to remember your platform. But he can't because he's flip-flopped on every platform he's ever held for his entire career. Remember, he was pro-life before he was for late-term abortion. It's a pretty big flip. He was for the wall before he was against it. It goes on and on. Joe Biden will do whatever it takes, and he'll take whatever position it takes to win an election. He has no principles. He has no standards. But again, because of the Democrat Party, it doesn't matter because you're not held accountable, right? You saw with the DNC, Bill Clinton was able to get on TV and lecture about decency in the Oval Office. When that happened, I was like, man, I didn't know whether to be impressed or upset. Like I was like, that takes some guts. Listen, now let's not go after Bill too much. I mean, in all fairness, we all feel bad for Bill. Because do you think there's a person in the world, not just America, in the world, who wants out of quarantine more than Bill Clinton? He's by far number one, and I feel for him because of it. Not much else, but that one I will give him.
And so when you look at the Democrat hypocrisy and also how they're trying to run a campaign, I mean, you cannot find someone who's voting for Biden without ever telling them, without them ever saying their reason, not saying the word Trump. There's no reason to vote for Biden. It's all just misimpressions and misinterpretations. And so when you kind of look at where this election is heading right now, you have President Trump, who in 3 years, 3.5 years, will be able to say, God willing, 3 justices, embassy to Jerusalem, Golan Heights, Iran deal canceled, peace in the Middle East, finally taking illegal immigration seriously, and the wall is being built. First step back, VA Accountability Act, right to try, largest tax cut in American history, did oversee the lowest Black, Latino, and Asian American unemployment in American history. Finally holding China accountable, finally after all of these years. And then we experienced an epidemiological Pearl Harbor from China, and what is the Democrats' response? Andrew Cuomo says it's the European virus. Joe Biden called Donald Trump xenophobic for closing off travel to China and Europe. Do you know that when President Trump closed off travel from China and Europe, especially Europe, there were 38 confirmed deaths in the United States? Nancy Pelosi was walking through Chinatown saying that Donald Trump is fear-mongering. And so when Joe Biden goes on his CNN town hall with his press secretary, Anderson Cooper, and he says that every single person would still be alive if Donald Trump would have done what he did. That is a pathological lie. For one, I am so done acting as if Joe Biden is a good person. Like, oh, he's good old Scranton Joe. No, he's an immoral, political hungry individual who wants nothing more than power. Maybe he wants to protect his family from all the things that his family has done over the last couple decades. That's right, and enriches
China is what they are because nobody has profited more on the backs of hardworking Americans exporting jobs than Joe Biden.
Hunter Biden sits on the board today of a Chinese company that's shipping jobs from Michigan to China. Today! It's going on this week.
That's where Hunter
Right? And no one's talking about it. You know, they don't talk about the brother, Jim, who got multi-billion-dollar contracts to build housing in the Middle East for the U.S. government. You know what the minor detail was? He'd never built a home in his life. His only experience was being connected to Joe Biden. Again, these are things that would be totally disqualifying if a conservative did it. That's why I wrote liberal privilege. I get to hear a lot about privilege. A lot. And I'll acknowledge that I'm totally blessed. I get that. But liberal privilege is that ability to be on both sides of any given argument to suit your needs, to get through whatever it is, to have a mainstream media that will be willing to overlook the most glaring and flagrant hypocrisy out there as though it doesn't exist, and to paint you in a light. You know, the media doesn't love Joe Biden, by the way. He wasn't their first choice. Okay, they wanted Kamala, but they're basically going to get him. What Joe Biden is, he's the camouflage for the radical left. He's the guy that you'll sell in there. Oh, it's Moderate Joe. Moderate Joe from Scranton. Well, you're not Moderate Joe with Kamala as your VP. You're not Moderate Joe. Yeah, you're not Moderate Joe with Beto O'Rourke as your guns are. Right? Beto, hell yeah, I'm going to take your AR-15. That's not a moderate position. And you're sure as heck not a moderate adopting Bernie Sanders' platform. I mean, I know Joe Biden has a history of plagiarism. He had to drop out of the presidency in 1988 for it. But he took Bernie's platform to make it his own. That's not a moderate platform, guys. That's a Marxist platform. That's the Communist Manifesto for the New Age. And you, the American taxpayer, have the privilege of a $4 trillion tax hike to fund such wonderful things as free health care for illegals. Now, you don't get that for yourself. You don't get that for your kids, but you can pay for them too. No matter how hard you work, you can keep doing that. Same thing with education. Same thing with lawyers. You can fund lawyers so that when they open up the borders and flood the country, they can make the process easier for them to get on that dole, to be able to get free healthcare, to free education. What do you think that does to middle-class America? What do you think that does to the lowest income earners, who for the first time in modern history have seen wage increases under Donald Trump? It destroys it. But you won't hear about that. Okay? We don't have the advantage of having a multi-billion-dollar mainstream media complex being our marketing arm. We don't have the advantage of having social media censor our opponents. You guys have all experienced that, I'm sure. We don't have the advantage of having big tech do the same with inboxing and search, SEO and optimization. We don't get that advantage. We are playing from a perpetual deficit, which is why people are like, Don, you're on the ground in 5 states tomorrow. Why is that? Because we have to make up for the disadvantages that we don't have. We don't have people doing our work. We don't have people handing it to us. It's a lot to compete against, guys. Big tech, social media, mainstream media, in and of itself. I mean, literally, that's billions of dollars of free donations to the Biden campaign, and we have to get over that. And we have to overcome that by being with the actual people that we plan on representing. By being there, getting you guys motivated, getting you guys engaged, getting you guys out there to do whatever it takes.
In addition to that, Don, we also are up against the universities. We have some amazing students for Trump here, and Turning Point Action. The president did something so historic last week, and the activist media did not cover it at all. As you know, many of your children and many of your young people in your life are being taught the lie of the 1619 Project and critical race theory. This is one of the most dangerous movements that is being pushed in our country today, misrepresenting our history. And if you have a younger generation that is being taught to hate the country they live in, that country will cease to exist. A country's ability to communicate core values to young people will determine whether or not that country will continue to exist or succeed. So the president did something so incredible last week in response to the hateful 1619 Project run by Nicole Hannah-Jones and the New York Times, which is propagandizing your children around fake history that somehow our country is a country we should be ashamed of. The president announced the 1776 Commission.
I do that every time. Every student in the room raises their hand, recognizing that they would be penalized for having an opinion that's different. You guys are awesome. Listen, guys, I get it. Where I come from, New York City, it isn't easy to be a conservative, okay? It's less easy to be a vocal conservative, and it's even harder to be a Trump